From the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., this is Update One, the club's official podcast. It features newsworthy stories originating from the NPC facilities, as well as broader topics related to journalism, communications, press freedom, and transparency.
Welcome to the National Press Club's Update One podcast. I'm Gemma Puglisi with the club's broadcast committee, and today it is a very important topic, caring for our veterans. It may be hard to comprehend, but there are homeless vets in our country, vets who have served and protected us and kept us all safe. Today, we talk to David Kurtz, the executive director of Veterans on the Rise, a nonprofit that, quote, is dedicated to providing a holistic system of care to fight veteran homelessness in the greater Washington, D.C. area. VOTR believes that no military veteran should be homeless in the shadow of national monuments and memorials built to honor their service. Welcome, David. Thanks for being here today. And before we hear more about the Veterans on the Rise, again, it is really hard to fathom that we have vets who are homeless. How can this happen?
Every homeless veteran has their own story, but I think there's a common thread, at least from my perspective, that every one of them has had some degree of difficulty in reintegrating into the general population once they leave the military. And I don't think that that's unusual. I think every veteran has some adjustments to make coming out of the controlled, very structured environment that the military has, and going into a more unstructured living existence in society at large. When anybody goes into the military, they are subjected to a degree of mental conditioning that takes place during basic training, whether it's boot camp or basic combat training, depending on the branch of service they enter. We've all seen the movies, whether it's Officer and a Gentleman or some of the movies escape me right now. Full Metal Jacket, I think, it has a pretty deep dive into the basic training experience. There's a high degree of mental conditioning that goes into making up the soldiers and Marines and airmen, conditioning them to the military experience that they're going to have over their enlistment or during their time in service. But there's really no corresponding decompression. When veterans come out of the service, when somebody comes out of the service, this current generation has gotten better in trying to reorient and have folks transition from the military back into civilian life. But this is often the key point when somebody comes back out of the service into civilian life, is readjusting to the civilian world. Some veterans have an easier time transitioning, and some veterans have a harder time transitioning. And depending on what their personal experience is, some people have trouble finding sustainable employment. Some people have issues with personal relationships, primary relationships, emotional situations they find themselves in that compound problems, financial difficulties. Every veteran has a different story and a different path they walk. And some of them, unfortunately, wind up in crisis that manifests itself in housing difficulties.
Thank you for sharing all that. And with that in mind, how did actually Veterans on the Rise begin?
We trace our past to the late 1980s when 4 veterans who experienced homelessness and challenges themselves, Al Burley among them, Phil Spencer, Jay
Chambers,
and Steve Middleton. These gentlemen experienced homelessness themselves. And as a result, they contributed their personal resources to start a home in 1989 for their fellow veterans who are experiencing homelessness. The organization actually incorporated in 1993, so we've just recently celebrated our 30th year. We work now for the last 10 or 15 years directly with the Veterans Administration in administering programs for homeless veterans. We provide housing and counseling services and connect these homeless veterans with the resources they need to establish self-sufficient lives, whether it's financial counseling, vocational rehab, substance abuse counseling. But what we do is we provide a hand up, not a handout. Each veteran in our care gets a customized treatment plan to find the resources to meet the needs they have to establish independent living.
What would you say is the number one issue that you have seen that many of these homeless vets come to you? What would be that one big issue?
It's complicated, but it all comes back to housing, and financial resources to find and sustain housing. Now, what each individual issue is could be mental health, could be substance abuse, could be vocational issues, lack of training. So every veteran is different in their needs. What we find is it's most important that we meet the veteran where they are and find and pay attention to them. First of all, establish an atmosphere of mutual respect. Somebody who is homeless living on the streets, they're not respected. So we have to meet the veteran where they are and establish an atmosphere and a relationship, a rapport of mutual respect. Once the veteran understands that we respect them for who they are and what their experience is, then we've got a chance to work with them and start building up the self-esteem and develop the rapport and work with them and connect them with the resources. Because every one of these folks has served in the military. There is at the core, there's capability. Every one of them is capable of addressing the needs they have. It's a question of motivating and tapping into that core that exists and finding that inner fire that needs to be rekindled.
You provide all these services, but there is also a place where they can come and stay as well. Is that correct?
That's right. We've got facilities in D.C., in Northeast District of Columbia. We've got 36 beds available at any given time, 24 beds in one facility and 12 beds in the other. The SMI facility is dedicated to those veterans. There are identified mental illnesses that need to be addressed. The other facility is more general. It's for emergency residential services. And every veteran that's referred to us by the Veterans Administration, the VA provides their physical medical needs. They conduct a triage and address whatever it might be, whether it's physical disability, whether it's a mental health issue, cardiopulmonary issues, mobility issues, whatever they are, the medical needs are addressed directly by the VA Medical Center. And then the housing, we provide the housing and the meals, wholesome meals and safe housing environment for the veteran to start addressing the long-term chronic issues that they face with, whether it's mental illness, substance abuse, financial education, trying to identify resources that they need for their long-term housing.
Are you seeing a rise in the homelessness issue with the vets, or do you feel that you and Veterans on the Rise is seeing that there is some impact in that sense? I mean, are you seeing an increase, a decrease?
From my experience over the last 5 years with Veterans on the Rise, I think we've seen rather a steady and incremental decrease, which is encouraging, but we're always worried about the economy and how the economy affects homelessness. Nationwide, HUD estimates that there are 18,000 incidents of homelessness every week in 2023. 18,000 new incidents of homelessness reported every week. In the DC metro area, the last point in time count that I've got available to me was in early 2023, and there was estimated about 320 homeless veterans in the DC metro area. In DC proper, in the district proper, they're estimating about 220 homeless veterans in early 2023. That's going to fluctuate based on the economy and to some degree based on the severity of weather, because veterans who are homeless, the worse the weather, the more visible they're going to be, and the more likely they are to seek assistance in shelters in the DC area.
You are hitting a very sensitive issue, and that is that the Supreme Court, we're talking about the homelessness issue and how many are homeless. As you know, The Supreme Court decision was made this past April, which fundamentally gives states the power to fine, ticket, or arrest people who are homeless, even if there's no other shelter available to them. And that overturns the Eighth Amendment, which protected the homeless, which said it was cruel and unusual punishment for the homeless to be arrested or criminalized. And obviously, this ruling impacts California and the 8 other states where we see a big population of homelessness. With that said, and our conversation about what you're seeing and the numbers you're providing, how is that impacting veterans on the rise?
This ruling overturns an earlier ruling that prevented municipalities and local government from using fines and criminal offenses. It deemed that it was cruel and unusual for municipalities to penalize people who are forced to sleep outdoors. Now, this is a question of local politics now, the political will at the local level, and how the local government deals with homelessness and homeless issues. It's a question of the political will at the local level. And depending on the local municipality, what my observation is in the Washington, D.C. metro area is that there's a strong commitment by local government to deal with the homeless issue on its merits. I mean, people who are homeless are not able to, they're sleeping outdoors, and they don't need to be penalized for that. What they need is housing. Right. What they need is shelter. And I think that there's a strong commitment in the local DMV to find the assistance and provide the services that homeless people need to find permanent housing. The DC area, I think, has a very robust system in place to deal with homelessness. The number of shelters and nonprofits and NGOs that are committed to deal with the homelessness are supported by local government. So I don't see an impact in the local area, in the local DC area as a result of this ruling. Now, it's California may be a different story from what we're seeing nationally. Right. But in the DC area, I see a strong local government commitment to work with the homeless population and find them housing.
You're so passionate about everything that you have done and your commitment to Veterans on the Rise. How did you personally get involved with the organization?
Well, I've been involved with veterans issues. I served in the Army for 6 years back in the day. I was a chief warrant officer, but one thing was drilled into us was, and this goes back to the basic training conditioning I talk about, is the loyalty to your unit, to your squad, to your platoon, to your company. You know, everybody is interdependent on each other. And I served in an armored cavalry unit in Germany during the Cold War. And it was very much impressed upon us how interdependent we were on each other. The combined arms training that we had, we were dependent on the Air Force. And within the Army, we were dependent on the artillery and the infantry and the aviation assets. Everybody, this interlocking dependency was very much impressed upon us. So coming out of the service and going back into the civilian world back in Milwaukee, where I'm from, I joined a veteran service organization and became very much involved in dealing with different veterans issues. And after 9/11 and the war in Iraq and Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, we saw more and more people coming back in the local community, particularly National Guard and reservists, who were being affected by this. The families of those who were deployed with the National Guard and the Reserve had a lot of needs at home that were being unmet. Like a broken water heater or a large car repair would cripple a family whose service member was deployed overseas. Suddenly, you know, a small emergency that you and I might have in a household, like a water heater or a car repair, literally crippled the remaining spouse's ability to deal with family issue. So they turned more and more to veteran service organizations to meet those needs. Mm-hmm. And that informed my experience going forward. Now, I relocated to the DMV in 2019 with my wife, who is from here. She's a native of Silver Spring. And looking for employment here, I found Veterans on the Rise. looking for someone with experience operating a nonprofit, which was my experience back in Wisconsin. That's how I found Veterans on the Rise.
Thank you for your service. What are some of the uplifting things that have happened to Veterans on the Rise? That it's been around now, you said, for 30 years? You celebrated. What are some of the things that you're most proud of?
I look at it from two perspectives. One is from an organizational perspective. The support we get from the community at large is very important to us. We've been able to find partners who have stepped forward, particularly some in the defense industry that have made a commitment to Veterans on the Rise to support our activities by making contributions of product, or volunteers who come and support our mission by serving food or helping us repair our facilities. Also, in-kind donations from service providers. We've got a legal support from law offices here in DC. That's very important to us. But what is probably most inspiring is the stories of individual veterans who have come into our program, who have found success, who have found employment and come into stable housing situations as a result of their work with us. And they've come back and supported veterans in the program today.
Right.
And informed them through their experience and inspired them about their success in finding housing, finding employment, and sustaining that over the years. That's very encouraging to us. Folks who have lost relationships, longstanding relationships into their 40s and 50s, and suddenly employment situations have changed and they found themselves without a primary relationship through breaking up our relationships, and suddenly they find themselves in crisis and finding their way through shelters to the VA, to Veterans on the Rise, into our facilities, and finding the resources that they need, vocational rehab, and then finding sustainable employment and revenues that help them sustain their housing situation.
Are there any activities or events that are coming up that you want to share with our listeners that Veterans on the Rise is working on or planning that you want everyone to know about?
Well, we're always looking for volunteers and help, and interested people can reach out to us on our website, veteransontherise.org. But we're looking at some facilities repair work we're going to undertake in October. And then Thanksgiving is always a big time around our facilities, the year-end holidays, with food service and supporting our initiatives around the holidays. But people interested in our organization can find more information on our website. It's veteransontherise.org.
Any other final thoughts that you want to share?
What homeless veterans need is housing. That's the short story. From my perspective, the big story is sustainable revenue, whether it's disability payments or employment, access to sustainable employment, income that's going to be sustainable. And that's critical. So I think many of us, go about our business and we see homeless folks and we don't really know what to do. You're always hesitant about enabling substance abuse, handing cash to somebody. Is that really going to food? Is that really going to something that's going to be a long-term solution to the homeless issue? So assisting programs like Veterans on the Rise or veteran service organizations and non-government organizations that are really doing something to assist people. It's hard to pass up somebody on the street who's obviously in need. So what I like to do is I like to give food, or I like to give hygiene products in particular are important, toothpaste, toothbrushes, tooth floss, these types of things. If I carry it around in my car and hand it out rather than cash, I think is helpful. But all of us can do more, I guess, is the last thing that I would say. If we have a willingness to do more, we'll find ways to do it. I'm very grateful for the time that you've committed to us, Gemma, and the support that we receive from people all across the DMV.
Thank you, David. And I appreciate your spending time and for all the work that you do. And that will do it for us today for the Update One podcast. Thank you again, David Kurtz with Veterans on the Rise, and for, again, all the work you do to help our homeless vets. My thanks also to my colleagues here at the National Press Club for their help with this podcast, Mike Hempen and Adam Cano. From all of us at the Press Club, I'm Gemma Puglisi. Thank you for listening.
You have been listening to Update One, the official podcast of the National Press Club, the world's leading professional organization for journalists and a vigorous advocate of press freedom worldwide. If you have any questions or comments about Update One, send an email to updateonepodcast@gmail.com.